Gary, are you with me? No, I'm not real good. The connection's not that great. What do you have me on speaker? All right, now I can hear you a whole lot better. Oh yeah, perfect. We're obviously not live yet, Gary, but we will be in just a moment, in about a minute.
Yeah, I got you on speaker now.
I can hear you pretty well on that.
Okay.
Listen, you got the email, correct?
Yes, I did.
Okay, perfect. So we don't let on that I gave you questions or anything. But we'll just go down those, and if there's anything else in between there, any other stories that come up, just go with it. There's no limit on the time, and you can take all the time you need. Okay. Hey, Gary, it goes in order. It goes in order.
Yeah, until we get old. So, but you can ask anything you want in between. And yeah, I made a few notes, so we'll let it fly.
All right, listen, I'm going to give a little bit of an introduction. I'm going to talk about sponsors, and then you'll hear me say my story with Chaplin, and then we'll go, okay?
Okay,
All right, so between now and then, just be quiet because I'm about to go live, okay?
yes, sir.
All right, stand by. Good morning, everyone. It's 11 o'clock in Hollywood, 2 o'clock in Hoboken. I am Joe Abadi, and you're listening to Vintage Motocross Radio. Now, whether you're listening from your phone or your computer, please share the show with your friends and get them to come down. We're going to have a great interview in just a moment. This program is, of course, made possible with the help of our sponsors, Nightmare Racing, the best reproduction Kawasaki plastic on the planet, Preston Petty Products, the legend continues, Amsoil, the first in synthetic oil since 1973, Full Circle Racing for rims, spokes, lacing, and truing for vintage and modern bikes. Please visit Full Circle Racing. Vintco, keep the ride going with over 650 products in their catalog. Motion Pro for specialized tools, cables, and controls. I'd also like to welcome a new sponsor, Golan Industries. Be sure to check out their fuel filters online. I'll be telling you more about them, of course, this week on Vintage Motocross Q&A. So be sure to visit all of our sponsors online and on Facebook. Some of the photos you'll see today are the courtesy of Mark Keel, Greg Greenwood, and Tim Buck. The majority of them were sent in to me by Scott Hybrink. Mark your calendar in 2 weeks. On the 22nd of November, my guest will be Tommy Croft. My guest this morning began his career in the early 1970s at what was the start of the golden era of motocross. He was a racer that earned success during that era as a factory racer for Mako, Honda, CZ, and DG Suzuki. He was also one of the early factory racers for Team Honda and one of the first to ride their open class machines. Highlights of his career include a runner-up finish in the 1971 Trans Am Series, a 1972 Inter Am Championship, top American honors at the Unadilla Inter Am in 73, and a runner-up finish at 1975's Daytona Supercross. In 76 in Dallas, he was victorious. He finished in the top 10 overall in the 500 MX class in 72 and in 74, and he was a top 10 250 rider in his class in 1973. My guest this morning is Gary Chaplin. Gary, are you with me?
I'm with you, Joe.
That's good. We got a great connection this morning, too. I can hear you loud and clear.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Gary. Thank you for taking the time to speak with me. Hey, Gary, where did your journey really begin with motorcycling?
Well, I was born in Paso Robles, California.
Okay.
And my dad was a big motorcycle enthusiast after World War II. He was a pilot. And he came home and he played around with some Jawa 250s and scrambles and hill climb. And he bought a big 650 BSA twin. And that's kind of how my eyes got real big when I was little.
Mm-hmm.
watching him do his thing. So, yeah, we moved back east when I was about 5 years old, and I lived in Iowa and South Dakota. My dad had a construction business, and eventually moved to Montana, where we bought my first motorcycle. It was a Hodaka Ace 90, and I think it was like 1967.
Okay. And that was your first stint on a little Hodaka. Now, none of us wake up one morning and say, I'm going to race motorcycles. So where did you go with the Hodaka? What were some of your earliest experiences on that before you actually got into a competitive race?
Yeah, well, my dad, he was in construction his whole life, and he bought this ranch in Montana outside of Kalispell.
Mm-hmm.
And he went into the logging business. And being a big motorcycle fan, he still got some magazines, I think some monthlies, and seeing the pictures and the trophies that he had racing when I was younger, I wanted to get into some of that. So he took me downtown into Kalispell. They had a Triumph dealer, and of course, I wanted a 500 twin Triumph. I knew he wouldn't let me get a 650, but I figured the 500 might be a little smaller.
Okay.
But he, I think it was around $1,500. So he said, "No, let's go to the next guy." So the next guy had CZ. He was a chainsaw guy, and I looked at this twin pipe 250, and like I say, it was 67, so it's probably a Joel Robert model. And he putted around outside and rode it over a couple logs. But I was sold on all the chrome on the Triumph, the chrome pipes and the chrome engine and how it sounded. And so yeah, the Jawa didn't impress me. So I think that was around $800. So we went to the next dealer, and this guy had Hodakas in his garage. So my dad, he cleverly sold me on the idea that I should start with a small bike. Everything else is kind of too big and too powerful. So he was pretty smart, and he was right. And the bike was about $400 and some. So yeah, so we got the Hodaka, and I did a lot of trail riding with it in Montana for the next year or so. The winters got kind of cold for my mom, and she wanted to move back to California. So we did. And there I met a guy. He had a Greaves motocross bike, and he took me to a race in Pozo Park. And I believe I finished like fourth place, but I fell down more times than I could count in the two motos. But so anyway, I hung in there and finished, and really got hooked. Made a lot of friends around. Cayucas was a little town that we lived in. My dad had sold the ranch and traded it out kind of for a beach town place. And so I kind of grew up there through high school, riding the Hodaka on the beach and out in the trails, and basically, learning how to ride.
Sure. Now, that was also, you just said that was the first bike you raced. So for how many years did you ride that little Hodaka in the races, and what was the next bike for you?
I rode the bike, I think, 2 races, 1 month.
Oh, okay.
And I was always kind of a guy that wanted to move fast. So we purchased a Sachs 125. We had a couple of older friends that were riding those, and they were pretty fast. So they handled a little bit better and a little faster, but it didn't shift real well. And my dad tinkered with it, and then we even tried some flat track because my dad was more in tune with, motocross really was early.
Mm-hmm.
This was the beginning of motocross, like when I lived in Montana and then moved to Cayucas back to California, 66, 7. The Europeans were just coming over, and unless you had a cycle news, you didn't know anything about it. So, and basically, I didn't know anything about it. And getting the Sachs and wanting to get a different bike, my dad knew a dealer at Paso Robles, Joe Brown, and we went and we bought a CZ 250. And I think I'd raced the Hodaka, like I said, a couple times, the Sachs maybe a half a dozen before we moved up to the 250. And I think I was like a sophomore in high school, and I was working at a grocery store, making my own money, had my own pickup truck, and my dad helped me co-sign when I needed to get something different, like a better vehicle or a motorcycle, but I was paying for everything, and he was bringing me up the right way. So we got the CZ, and we did some more flat track racing. I didn't like that too much. Did okay with the Sachs. I think I finished second at a state championship in the class I rode. And some guy on a twin 100 or 125 Yamaha, he had the record at Bonneville with it, so it was pretty fast. I remember it was at Bakersfield, Sprocket's track, and he got first, I got second. And I tried a few races flat track on the CZ, and it was fun, but I definitely wanted to go the motocross direction. So I started to race at Santa Maria Speedway and some of the local district tracks, Pozo Park and out in the valley. And, that was kind of the start of it until I blew the bike up and ran out of money.
And by that time, Gary, would you say it was the early 70s, 71, 72?
No, the CZ was a 69, so I pretty much worked that over that whole year.
Mm-hmm.
I think I probably raced maybe not more than 30 races as an amateur, so it wasn't too much of a career on and off for a couple of years. In 1970, I sold the bike. I had a dealer help me put it together because it had blown up. And a Santa Maria Cycle Sport and another Japanese fella, I can't remember his name, but he let me ride his AJS for a few races, and I hit a tree kind of spectacularly in Santa Maria. It was called the Speedway track, just up from what eventually became Spillway Park. So I kind of bent the frame up and the wheels and everything, and he was a little disappointed, so I lost that ride. And so I sat for about 6 months and didn't ride at all. And the high school friend, David Leopold, wanted me to race his 250 Yamaha. So I'd become friends with Mike Runyard and a few guys that I'd met at some of the local races. And I got my my license so I could race in the Edison Dye series. And that was with the professional Americans and the Europeans, and I signed up in the pro class. I just gave them results that I had finished as an amateur, and they granted me a license. Really had no idea what was going to happen, and I shouldn't have been there. But I raced at Baymare and Ascot and Hollister in that series. And
how did you do?
I can't tell you how many times I got lapped. This was like a DT1 with a fork brace and a 19-inch front wheel and Trials tires. So yeah, riding against DeCoster and those guys, it was kind of a, like I said, I shouldn't have been there, but that's the way it was back then. So I think the best finish was maybe a 20th, I think, at Baymare, and that was just in a moto. So getting lapped and seeing what it was all about was not disheartening. It was pretty cool, actually, because it made me want to be maybe a racer if I had what it took. But yeah, that was my friend's bike, and that went by the wayside. And I was working at a grocery store, and I didn't do anything for another 3-4 months after that. And the spring of '71, the Mako dealer, it was a Stacy Marine, Dwayne Stacy and his brother.
Okay.
They said, hey, if you buy a Mako from us, we'll sell it to you at cost, and we'll give you a van, fill it up full of gas, and you can go to Baymare, Indian Dunes, the closer tracks, saddle back if you think you can swing that extra hour drive, and see how you'll do. These guys saw me race as an amateur, and I guess they saw something in me that I might be able to become some kind of a pro. So
sure. And was it a 250, Gary, or a 400? What were you riding?
No, I bought they sold me on the 400. I bought a 400, never ridden an open bike. So again, I went to a couple flat track races and did pretty good with the big 650s, and went to some local motocrosses. I think Spillway Park when they opened, Santa Maria, and then started to go south. I mean, why wouldn't you? The only guy that was upset was my boss at the supermarket in Cayucas, because I was always wanting to get the Friday off, the weekend, and Monday, and but yeah. So I went there for like 3 months, I guess, 3-4 months through the summer, and I think I got close to getting lapped maybe the first time there. I can't really remember, but that's how much slower I was than guys that raced there, like Chamberlain and Billy Payne, Tim Hart, Jim Wilson, DeSoto, Blackwell. Those are the guys I remember riding against there in the beginning, and John R. It took me a good month or two before I could kind of stay on the same lap, and then after another month or so, I was getting up in the top 10, and then another month I was getting in the top 5. So I actually learned pretty quick. On Bay Mare, especially Indian Dunes, I didn't race there as much, but the dealer told me, my friend Stacy that owned the dealership said that Frank Cooper was the distributor, and he said all you have to do to get sponsored, basically get some parts, and that was his, that was the sponsorship part, getting parts, tires, things like that.
Yeah.
No motorcycles at the time, no salary, no gas, no. Would be beat Tim Hart and beat Billy Payne and beat Luke and Bob Messer and John R. And Chamberlain was kind of an older rider. He was just kind of probably at his peak right then, but he was a big Bay Mare guy. And let's see you beat all those Mako guys, and then we'll see about giving you some parts. So, and then, that's just the Mako guys. I already mentioned the other guys like Blackwell and Jim Wilson, Tom Rapp, those guys.
Yeah.
But anyway, we did pretty good. So I got a phone call. I beat some of those guys. Tim Hart was probably the best of the Mako guys at the time. And I got a call from Frank Cooper, and the Trans Am series was going to go off in a few weeks. And they said, would you ride the Trans Am series if we build you a 250 and ride the support class? Tim Hart's going to ride it also, and we'll give you a gas card. And we'll set you up with a ride with somebody that's going to be going that has the van. And another couple of guys getting supported. So that was the first kind of getting sponsored that happened for me.
Who were the guys that were in that van with you, and how did all those road trips go on that series?
Yeah, that was really fun. I guess the 4 or 5 months previously, I had met Bob Grossi. We raced at the Sand Pit. My dad had talked to his father, and my dad was always interested in what everyone else is doing, trying to maybe further my experience, on hey, how does this work? So I'd met Brad Lackey and became friends with Brad. And so when we went on that series, it was the first time I went to Carlsbad. That was the first race, and then we went to, I think, Idaho, and then it was off to Wisconsin, I believe. But anyway, yeah, Carlsbad, I think I finished 4th place maybe there. Can't remember how I finished in the motos, but it was Tim Hart, Dwayne Jones, and Doug Grant, Rob Norgard, Joe Witt, a lot of the fast guys, local guys, and yeah, I thought I did okay. Mako was happy, and they introduced me to these guys. Jim Wicks was from Colorado. He had raced in the international class for several years, and he was a pretty good, probably a top 30, 40, pro rider in the States. And Mike Cram was the #1 CMC rider, so he had a lot of experience, especially at Carlsbad and Saddleback. So we took off together, and I think we made it 1 or 2 races, and they kind of were giving up. I think I finished in the top 5 the second race and the third race. I can't remember if it was the second or third race, though. They both decided to go home.
Okay.
So I can just remember sitting out on the hotel with my suitcase and my bike in front of me on the steps, and Lackey came by and said, "Hey, what are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I said, Wicks and Cram went home. So here I am. I guess I need a ride. So he goes, oh, man, I know just the guy. So he brings Bruce Barron over, and Bruce is kind of a cocky guy at the time. He's a pretty good California rider. But it's like nobody was going to go with him, especially, carte blanche. So, he said, nah. And Brad says, well, Gary's got some money. And I said, yeah, I was fairly cocky at the time, especially when somebody was kind of ruffling my feathers. I said, yeah, I think I finished better than you this first 2 or 3 races, so I got some cash. And I said, I also got the Mako credit card. And then Barron's eyes all lit up, said, okay, let's let you ride. So that lasted for 2 or 3 weeks, and we hit Unadilla. We did pretty good through there. We got some second places in some motos. Tim Hart was kind of leading the way, and Mako actually gave me a van that I finished out the series with, and back east. And yeah, we finished out that series. Tim Hart won the series. I got second in the series, but learned a ton.
Sure.
Being it was probably I hadn't even raced 50, 60 races or motos under my belt from the day I started. So yeah, I was a quick learner, and Tim Hart helped me tremendously. Maybe not personally so much, but I really paid attention because he was a teammate and he was the fastest in our class. He could have rode the international class, but there was a little bit of sandbagging there, and guys that wanted to ride that class they could with experience. Dave Aldana rode it. Dick Mann rode it. Tom Rapp rode it. I mean, these are guys that have tons of experience, and then some new guys, Doug Grant. So yeah, it was interesting. It was a great way to get started.
Was Bobby, you and Bobby Harris, were you guys traveling together from Mako as well?
Yeah, that was after. Bobby was actually racing also. He was racing the international class, I think, that year. He raced, he had support of Bultaco.
Okay.
But I met Bob the next year when I started going to some local pro races when we were back east, waiting in between nationals. And Bobby was a teammate of mine. Bless his soul. He passed away some years ago.
Yeah.
And people don't remember the name, but him and Jim Weinert were probably 2 of the top New York racers at the time.
Yes.
And Bobby raced for, like I said, Bultaco, and then we raced for Mako together for a couple of years, and also for CZ for a year. So he was a great individual to travel with. His wife Diane, my first wife. We all had some great times together.
Now, after the first year on the Trans Am Series, you guys wrap it up. You then get a sponsorship the next year with Mako, or is it the same local dealer giving you support with the van and the card? What happens with Barron? Where does that all end?
Yeah, well, Bruce Barron and I got a van from Cooper, like I said. I think it was after Unadilla. So I did the next part of the series on my own. Steve Agronic traveled with me, and we finished out the series. He actually didn't travel with me, but I had to tow him into California. I think he ran out of money or something, but he's a funny individual. But he was another top rider from the East Coast, and riding the Mako. So I was trying to help him out because I had the credit card. Yeah, after all that, I had broke my ankle in '71 at the last race at Saddleback. Luckily, I had won a race. I'd won my first race in Oklahoma. I think I won 2 motos and got a second, or maybe I swept. I don't know. I can't remember. But I did good in that race and got some seconds before and a bunch of seconds afterwards, and finished second in the series. So Cooper was interested in keeping me. He told me he had a list of Mako guys, and Tim Hart was at the top. But Tim was kind of wanting to race and maybe make more money and not maybe go out on the circuit. And if he did go out on the circuit, he wanted to have a contract. So I know he was talking with Yamaha, can't remember exactly when he signed with him. It even could have been the next year. I can't really remember what year it was, but the other Mako guys, they'd all been around for quite a few years. And Frank just said, "Hey, you're the new guy. You've done pretty good. Will you go out on the circuit and do all the races?" And he offered me a contract, and I think it was $175 a week.
Okay.
Because I remember going into the 200 ranks, boy, that was really big.
Yeah.
Japanese started to come in and get some of the top riders, and making upwards to $200 or $300. That was a lot of money back then. Doctors and lawyers and stuff like that. They made that kind of money back in the early 70s. So I said, yeah, great. So he set me up with some 250s and 500s. The new bike just came out, the Radial 400. And I couldn't race the bike because like I said, broke my ankle the last race. So after it had healed up for a few months, I started to ride the Cooper motorcycle. Frank put me up in a motel down in Burbank.
You rode a Cooper?
I rode 4 or 5 days a week riding the Cooper out at Indian Dunes. And that was his Mexico creation that he was trying to, get ahead. And he just thought this would help me get my ankle healed up and help him also. So at the beginning, I just took the Cooper to the track, but it would blow up, in a couple of laps. The clutch especially was prone to breaking down. So I talked him into giving me a bike, but he didn't want to give me a new square barrel because this new Radial 400 was going to come out. They hadn't received any of them yet. And I said, okay, any bike, any Mako. So I would throw the 2 bikes in the truck. I'd go to Indian Dunes. I'd get on the Cooper. I'd just turn it wide open for 2 laps until it blew up. Then I jumped on the Mako and ride the rest of the day. So that's how it went for several months until I could get back racing again, which was probably in April or so. I hit some of the bigger local races, and then the Radial bike came, and then we started the Nationals.
Now, Gary, when you're out there with that van, with the Mako from Frank Cooper, who's turning the wrenches out there at the track? You're doing it all yourself?
No, there was no wrenches. He just told me to take the Cooper out.
That's what I'm saying. So, but when you went on the road to a race, whether it was a national or a Trans Am, did you have a mechanic with you at that point when you were riding for Frank Cooper?
No, when my ankle was completely healed up, we'd already talked about the contract, and it was going to be bikes, parts, the paycheck once a week, and a gas credit card. So that was pretty big for me, anyway. The mechanic was like, that's on you. If you've got a mechanic, if you've got a friend, if you're turning the wrenches yourself, that's what's going to happen through 1972. When you are at some of the races, some of the dealers that we're in contact with, we'd like them to come and help you, clean your air filter, adjust your chain, give you some help when you're away from home. And that did happen. And when he traveled back east, Denny Moore was the Mako distributor. I got to know Denny a little in 71 and quite a bit more in 72. So that was the help. I had a friend that went with me on some races in the spring, I think it was, maybe the summer. They didn't travel with me all the way back east, but I was just traveling with my wife at the time, and pretty much wrenching myself. So that's how we started the Nationals, and then went into the Interam in 1972.
Okay. Now, I guess it was about a month ago now, I had Selvaraj Narayana on the show. He talked a lot about you and his early time with Mako, and he's had such an interesting life and such a career. I was wondering if you could maybe tell us a little bit about when you first met Sel along the road with the Makos and what that relationship was like.
Yeah, that was fantastic. That was pretty much a high point in my life, in my racing. Meeting Salvaraj. Just before that, like I said, when I signed with Frank, There were some other riders that were riding Makos, but I think I was the kind of the main guy.
Mm-hmm.
And I was the main guy because I stuck it out through the whole year, and getting paid and, getting my gas and all the bikes and stuff. And anything that was new, or if it was an aluminum brake pedal or a brake stay or something, fantastic, or aluminum body shock, I would have it on the bike. So Mako, I think, factory was giving the distributors money to pay us. But when I got back east and I met Denny Moore at Eastern Mako, he wanted to help even more. So he sponsored me. He had an ASR company, and he sponsored me to wear his clothing and his boots, and it was the blue and yellow stuff, and it was this fantastic stuff that I wore all in '73. But because of that, I think when the Germans came over, and the Swede, Aki Janssen, the Mako, the head Mako guys knew I was the American guy, so Salvarage took a liking to me and Denny at Eastern Mako, and I think I wasn't sure how I was sitting in the points, but when I first got that radio, I finished second at a national to Brad Lackey, and Brad hadn't been. I don't think Brad was beaten in any moto that year in nationals on his Kawasaki,
right,
or his CZ. I think he had just a winning streak. And I almost beat him at Tahoe. It went down to the last lap in a 40-minute moto, and I was tired, and he made up a bunch of ground on me and beat me, and so anyway, I was super excited to be part of that Mako team. And when the Europeans came over, they said, "Oh, okay, well, let's see what this guy can do." And Denny wanted to really push me, so I remember Sal and Denny built me a Mako for the first Trans Am race, and it wasn't a Cooper bike. It wasn't the bike I'd been racing. It was actually Denny Moore's flat track motor, and it was kind of like what I'm saying, a flat track motor. It was a handful to hang on to, and we took it to the first race at Copetown in the Trans Am, and Salvarage was there with the Mako guys, and there was a Bel Ray racing team. Bel Ray had jumped in and offered a bunch of money to be the Mako sponsor, and it was just a great time to be around those riders and watch them, how they do the things. They were so much superior than the Americans at the time. For some of your viewers, listeners that don't know, I mean, in those early years, Americans would get lapped by the top, a couple of Europeans, Robert, DeCoster, Aki.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't the top American by no way. I was trying to get to the top 5 at the time, and had a few of those finishes that year, but in the Trans Am. But the top 10 Americans, we had a tough time, but we were learning as we went. So Salvarage decided to stay in America and went to work for Denny Moore after that series, and so that's where we got to become really good friends. At the end of the series, he went back east and got his papers all straightened out, his visas, and I had been a little upset with Frank Cooper that year because he wanted me to ride the Radial Mako in the support class in the Interam summertime, and I wanted to ride with the International, the 250 guys, which was the square barrel. And he just wanted to promote his Radial, and it was, he was the boss, and that's what I had to do. So it was a good experience, and there was always good competition in the support class. Everybody will tell you that's where a lot of the guys begin, and that's where a lot of the guys go back to when they're not winning at the international level. So I did race that. I did win the championship that year, but I really wanted to race with the big guys, and more than that, I wanted to really make some more money because I was married and trying to get around. I just wanted to get ahead, and it's one of the mistakes that I made at the end of that year. I didn't sign again with Frank Cooper with Mako. I made a deal with Bultaco, and it was to ride the bulls and travel with Gary Bailey help him do some schools, and ride in the nationals and Trans Am is what I understood. And I think our communication broke down because Gary was more interested in the schools and a couple of big races, and I was more interested in the big races. But my contract through Bultaco was through Gary Bailey, so that Bultaco race team only lasted a few months. Bobby Harris was on it, and we missed a couple of the first nationals in '73, which hurt our chances and our overalls at the end of the year. But yeah, I left Bultaco, and Eastern Mako, Denny Moore said, "Here, I got bikes, I got parts, I got Salvarage, but no contract, no money contract." So that's how I raced most of '73, which was probably the fastest I went in my entire career. Many months on the national tour and on the Trans Am, Inter Am, I'm sorry, that I was competitive with all the top riders.
Now, Gary, you mentioned something about Salvarage and Makos, obviously, and there was a thing about your first wife. And I heard a story from a mutual friend of ours, Brad Lackey, and he tells me about there's this wedding and the Mako trailer's there, and these bikes wind up coming out of the trailer at the reception. What wedding was that? Was that your wedding?
Yes.
So what happens? There's the reception's going on, and what? They're cocktailing, and all of a sudden everybody thinks it's a good idea to take out bikes?
Yeah, I don't know if everybody did. I got married in '72, and it was after the Road Atlanta Trans Am. We were on the way to Florida, so there was a mutual friend that knew Gary Bailey, had a beautiful home. It's actually right next to Dwayne Allman, and where Cher and Dwayne Allman resided.
Okay.
We lived, and it was probably on a couple of acres. But yeah, we got married there. Tom and Artie, that was their name. They had a beautiful home, and they must have had 100 acres of grass all the way around the front, the back, the sides. So we were married there, and during the reception afterwards, yeah, Brad, I gotta probably put it on him. I think he was the one that got into the Bel Ray bus, and the Mako team was there at the wedding. Aki and I can't remember. Giuseppe Cavallero. I'm not sure about Bauer or Adolf, because some of the guys didn't come every year, but I know Aki was there for sure. And Brad pulls out Aki's bike, and I can't remember what the other bike was. It could have been mine. It was probably the first two that, when he opened the door, he grabbed. And he brought him to the backyard, and he told me and Mark Blackwell, "Hey, let's have a race around Tom's yard. I've already checked it with him, and he said it's okay. Don't worry about the grass." I mean, this guy's got a manicure, and it looks like a golf course. And he said, "We'll have a flat track around here, and we're going to do a little different. It's going to be a team race." So I think it was Blackwell and myself and Brad, and I can't remember who was behind him. But yeah, we had a little race, and got some excitement going with the neighbors. And I was like, "God, are you sure Tom and Artie don't care?" And he said, "Go for it." So that's that story. Salvarage was there. He was an intricate part of the team at the time, mechanic and driver, I think, and all-around helper. And I think he was about ready to kill Brad. And Aki was in there toasting people with champagne, and I don't even know if he got out in the backyard and even saw his bike. But if he did, I don't think he really cared too much anyway.
Everybody was having a great time. That's what it sounds like to me. Hey Gary, did you ever spend any time in Europe at the Mako factory at all during your career?
No.
Okay.
No, the Mako factory, or the Mako, the Germans, they were a tough bunch to get to know. I got to know Werner Schutz a little bit when they brought him over. He was a up and coming German guy, probably a top 5 guy over there.
Yeah.
And we raced against each other in '71, and he stayed and raced for Cooper, I think, for a year or two back. When I was racing the nationals, he was more sticking around local stuff. But some of the other guys, like Adolf, was real hard to get to know and talk to. So the Germans, yeah, that was a different deal. It wasn't like the CD factory where they took, like Marty Tribe. He went over there when he was 13 or 14, and Brad went over, and Husqvarna took Grossi and Blackwell. Makos didn't do that.
Yeah.
So they put a little less money and effort into the racing overall, for the Americans anyway, than CZ did and Husqvarna did and Bultaco at the time.
Gary, did you ever ride a 125 Mako in some GP in America?
Yeah.
You did?
Yeah, I did. It was, I think that was in the spring of '73, and I had gotten back on Mako, and Denny Moore had a 125, and I think Mako sent him over a different rotary valve for it and a pipe. And I never had gotten on the bike, and we left Pennsylvania and drove to St. Louis, Salvarage, and myself. And I don't think he'd run the bike maybe in the parking lot at the warehouse, but we got there and we had a day to try to get it jetted and broke in, and it was basically like a 250 or a 400, but just with a smaller motor. So the Hondas hadn't came out yet, the CR 125 Hondas. So like Marty Smith showed up with a Monarch, and I could go on and on. Danny Turner, Ray Lopez, probably Bruce McDougall, Bob Grossi. Several Europeans came over, and they did call it a GP.
But it wasn't
a CZ guy, but yeah, it was a big race, and then every other 125 top rider from the United States pretty much showed up on Harleys and Can-Ams. Yeah, Beecham, Jim Beecham was there on a Harley.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, it was just like one right after another. Tony Wynn, Nicky Boone. It was pretty cool. And the Mako did pretty good. It was a smooth, flat track kind of, so it didn't have to climb a lot of hills. Once you got your start, if you could just keep it wide open on the flat type of terrain, you could keep your momentum going. And yeah, the first moto, I think I got a top 5 start and went into like the second turn, I think. And the 2 Europeans were on Huskies, and they were together side by side. And Marty Smith went in a little too hot, I think, and he stuck his front wheel between them, and he high-sided. There's actually a picture of me, maybe in the magazine that covered it, but I'm right behind him as he's going overboard. And I just remember running over poor Marty and his bike.
Oh, gosh.
And I think either he was hurt enough or the bike was damaged enough. He didn't race again after that at that event. And he was one of the fastest guys there.
How did you finish that day, Gary? Do you remember?
Yeah, I ran up there with the Europeans. It was a 40 minutes plus 2 laps on these 125s.
Wow.
So I ran up front with them for I think 30 minutes or so, and then Grossi was up there, and yeah, there was all kinds of guys like Kenny Zart, Nicky Boone, the guys that finished up there. A guy maybe from Goss, a flat track Harley racer. Won a championship. I think he was there as a kid. Some guy from Texas. But yeah, there was some tremendous racing, but we kind of got away from everybody, the Europeans. And I think myself and Grossi, my bike seized maybe 30 minutes into the race, trying to race with these guys. And we were all pretty close there. And then the next moto, pretty much the same thing. We got the bike going again, and can't remember how long it went, maybe half the moto. And we were running up in the top 3 or 4 again, and the bike quit. So yeah, that was it for the 125 Mako.
That was it.
It was never ridden again by me after that.
No, that was the one and only day you had ridden that bike.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking at this point, you're getting close to finishing up with Mako at that time, and how did the Honda ride come along, Gary?
Well, I've been racing in '73 on the 250 square barrel, and doing pretty good. I had gotten several starts on some of the nationals, and even pulled 20, 30 seconds on some of the fastest guys. Gary Jones, probably Marty Trice were some of the fastest guys. I mean, that only happened for a couple of times. I remember in Texas, Unadilla, and a place in Ohio. But I finished second in some nationals and never won a 250 national. But had some good finishes, some second overalls, and the Trans Am. I guess you could say the Trans Am, when I finished top American in the Interam, that was like a national. I think they counted our points as a national. So
Yeah.
maybe I got first place national points for that. But yeah, that race, Honda had started to talk to me, and CZ also, because I had a real good race at Unadilla. I thought I was going to win the second moto. I had 30 seconds, I think, on Mikola and Falta and Tripes, and I tipped over like around the 30-minute mark, high-sided, hitting a rock, and they pretty much caught me by the time I got my bike picked up and restarted. And I think I raced with them and finished fourth. But just a side note, I got to throw this in.
Yeah, please.
I'll never forget Don Jones. You know, Gary Jones' father.
Sure.
He always seemed to take a liking to me. I don't know, just because, you know, I respected him, and I was pretty good friends with Brad Lackey, and him and Gary didn't get along because they were always, you know, banging each other, going for the win. But I don't know, Don was really gung-ho American and wanted to see us win the Europeans, and he was out there jumping up and down every lap I went by in Unadilla when I had a big lead. And I'll just never forget that. You know, somebody racing on another team, Gary was on the Honda at the time, I was in the Mako, and his dad out there jumping up and down. So anyway, that was pretty cool. But yeah, I ended up getting top American there. I think I finished fourth overall. So Mikola and Falta, I don't know, the next European, but that was pretty much a highlight of my racing in '73 so far. So Honda talked to me, and CZ, and I told CZ, you know, I couldn't go there. I was already on a team with no money, and yeah, Honda said, well, we'll talk at the next race. So we went to Texas, and talked to the Honda manager, and then there was another assistant manager, Blanton. And John R. was one of the mechanics, you know, Marty, Rich Airstad, Gary Jones, that was Dwayne Jones, that was the team. And those guys were always up there, you know, definitely front runners. And at Texas, I think I took the start, the first moto, and got out in front. And I think Gary Jones settled into second. And the track, I think, was dusty too, which helped me, but I definitely had a 20, 30-second lead on everybody until the last lap, and the bike had expired, quit with a lap to go. So yeah, that was kind of disheartening. It happened once before in the middle of the year when I was leading the moto, but it wasn't the bike's fault. I dropped in a mud hole, and too much water got on the bike, and it sputtered. Wouldn't get going for 20 seconds or so. Gary Jones passed me, and I finished second. You know, stuff happens to everybody.
Sure.
You know, but you know, those things are happening to you, and you're not making a lot of money. So Honda, after that Texas, they saw me race at Unadilla in Texas. They didn't pay attention. They said, "Hey, we want you to come to the team." And I said, "Well, before the nationals are done?" And they go, "Yeah, we'd like you to race the next two races." So I went back to Mako and told Denny Moore. That was one of the worst things I had to do, tell Denny, because I love that guy. He helped me so much.
Mm-hmm.
And Savaraj. And Savaraj built me the lightest Mako ever in the world that week to race at Pocono. And, you know, but I I couldn't resist. I took the deal with Honda, and after that race, I went to Kentucky. I think was the next race, and I raced there on the Honda. Never been on the bike before. You think in the afterwards, after it's all over, you think maybe I should be testing the bike, before I could jump on it and sign a contract. And, when you see Gary Jones and Marty Tripes and Dwayne and Rich Irestadt, what they did on those 250s that year is like, man, I want to ride that bike. That bike is fast.
But the 250,
yeah. So the 250, so that's what we did. So I think I finished fifth my first outing on that bike. But let me tell you, I was 30 seconds at least or more behind the front runners. And I just thought to myself, oh man, I hope I didn't just shoot myself in the foot.
Gary,
and then we went to the next race. It was the last national. Honda decided to let everybody race stock Hondas. I was like, stock Honda? And Gary had cinched the championship. So I guess they wanted to show that, hey, we can race stock bikes and win too. And I don't know who won that race, but I don't think it was Gary. But we all raced stock Hondas, and I think I got a 6th or a 7th, and was a little unhappy because there's a big difference between that RC and that. So yeah, then it was on to the Trans Am, going to Japan.
So you went to Japan?
Yeah. So they basically hired me to finish out that year.
Mm-hmm.
I finished 8th in the 250 nationals, but I raced mostly all of them on the Mako, except the last 2 on the Hondas. So yeah, I think I finished 8th, and I think when I look back, I counted the motos up for the races, and either I only went to half of the races, maybe a little more, but I only scored points in maybe half of the races. So I was pretty proud of that. And Honda pointed that out to me. They said, you finished 8th, only scoring points in half of the races because your bike broke down and you missed a couple races when you're on the Bultaco. So we think you did pretty good, and you can do a lot better on the Honda. So yeah, I think Jones won that year, and Tripes might have been 3rd or 4th. I can't remember. Weinert was a big competitor.
I just got disconnected from Gary Chaplin. Just bear with me a moment. I'll get him back on the phone. You're listening to Vintage Motocross Radio with Joe Abadi. My guest today is Gary Chaplin, and we were just talking about his career at Honda. And once I get him back online here, we'll continue our conversation. Hello. All right.
Hi, thank you for calling Credit Fund Bank.
Bear with me just a minute. I don't know why. Chappie.
I lost you.
Yeah. Okay. So we were with you finished 8th that year. You're on that big bore Honda, which is not the greatest bike in the world according to you and to Gary Jones. I spoke to Jones about that bike one time too, and nobody was a real big fan of it. So what happened for 74? You go back to Honda again, though.
Well, I had signed with them in 73. We raced the last couple 250s.
Mm-hmm.
We went to Japan, Marty and I, tested the 500. Marty had a broken arm. He really couldn't ride, but he just went with me because they offered him. They said, you want to go, Gary? So he was going to be riding the bike after his arm healed up. So we did go to the first race in the Trans Am. The bike showed up 30 minutes before the race started because they had some problems getting them into the country, we were told. So it didn't start off good, and the 500s were not really that competitive. But I had signed a race through the whole year, and then we were going to – I could have signed – I can't remember how many months it was, if it was months or a year or maybe just the 73 year. It's been too long ago, but we were anticipating to sign anyway in 74, a new contract. But, yeah, the Trans Am didn't go that well. Marty didn't come to all the races. I think Marty might have finished better than me at his best race there on the 500, but it wasn't like we were used to. We weren't finishing in the top 3 Americans or top 5. I think I finished maybe top fourth American twice, maybe in the top 10 or top 12. But that was riding a 250 RC disguised in the open class. So the rest of the time, the 500 just didn't work. Yeah, Gary Jones and Don Jones. Don kept telling me, "Don't do it, don't do it, don't do it, don't sign with them," and he was right. The bike needed a lot of work. So that was that. In '74, Marty went his own way, Tripes, and I went to Florida Series. And after being with him for a couple months, see, they didn't have the backing or the money or the parts, I guess. Because I guess if they had the money, they'd have the parts. But we never raced the race RC bikes after the national. The rest of '73 and into '74, it was, here's a stock bike, and this is what you're riding, and we're going to wait for everything to show up. We even went to Daytona, and the bikes weren't ready. So we raced stock 250 Elsinores at Daytona in '74. So that wasn't real good. I wasn't real happy, and it was tough to negotiate. They didn't want to seem like they wanted to negotiate anyway with me, and Tripes was gone. So I think they had their sights set on somebody that could do better than me because they weren't satisfied with Tripes' results, my results. Gary Jones went on his own way. So, that's when they started hiring all the 125 riders. And they still hung on to Eierstadt. I guess after Daytona, I got ran over. I dropped the bike in a corner and got ran over, T-boned in my back. And I was hurting pretty bad. And I couldn't ride the last moto. And I just got in the rent-a-car and left. I mean, we had enough rent-a-cars there. I said, I'm going back to the hotel, man. I'm hurting. So anyway, they continued not wanting to sign a contract. We got back to California, and they said, we would just as soon part ways. So I think they paid me for the rest of the contracts. It might have been a year contract because I got 2 or 3 months, severance pay, or whatever you call that.
Severance pay.
And then, so that's how I parted with Honda. And then '74 was upon us.
Well, Gary,
the big races were upon us.
Let me ask you this before we move on. You and Gary Jones, I mean, you're great riders. You're capable of doing some things. You're on these bikes. When you're giving feedback to your mechanics or to your team manager at Honda, well, what's going on? Are people just saying we have no parts, we can't fix it, this is it?
Well, not exactly. They were trying the best they could. I don't know how much experience overall all the guys had at Honda, the manager included. I know most of them had worked out of dealerships, and they had got picked by Honda. John R. was the one, Warren Reed's stepdad, that I knew the best.
Sure.
Fantastic mechanic, fantastic person. A couple other guys were really good mechanics on that team. I was so gun shy of that 500. It revved like a TM 400 Suzuki, with a huge piston and a tiny stroke and no flywheel, and it was just scary to ride. And it had instant carburation, instant throttle response, but we weren't on a quarter-mile drag strip. We were trying to ride through whoop-de-doos, and it was scary. It was tough. I remember Eierstadt's mechanic stayed with me in Florida, and he got Rich's bike ready. And I said, "Man, what can we do to this bike?" And he said, "Well, let's gear it up. Let's go from a 49 to a 39 or something."
Okay.
So we really geared it tall, so it probably made it like a 3-speed. And then he said, "Let's put a couple of head gaskets in it." So we put a few extra head gaskets in it, really lowered the compression. And he said, "That's about all I can do." So, I rode the bike, and it kind of hesitated, probably with the lower compression. And the jetting that was in there was perfect before, but now it wasn't. But it was slower acceleration, and so I said, "Okay, we'll try this." And we were at Orlando Sports Stadium, and it was a complete sand whoop track. And if I was going to do terrible on any kind of a track, it would be a sand track. I wasn't that good in the sand. But I went there, and we were sitting in the pits, and the mechanic was Roy Turner.
Yeah.
And Roy saw the Japanese take the dial indicator and put it in the head, and they were going to time the bike. Well, he'd already put some head gaskets in there, and he knew the timing wasn't going to work out. I think he came over to me, and he said, "Man, I'm going to get fired." And so you can't say nothing. I said, I'm not going to say anything. I went over and told the Japanese, I said, hey, we don't have time for this. We got to get going. Put the spark plug back in. Let's get going. I got to get the bike to the start line. And so we took off. And that bike was really hard to ride. I think it overheated, actually, that race. Quit one moto, probably because some of the things that was done to the compression, but I don't know. It was just difficult to ride. So starting in '74, it was definitely time to get back on the Mako, and that's what we did. We made a deal with Mako back east. The Germans had came in and took over, so unfortunately it wasn't going to be with Cooper or Denny Moore. The Mako came in, took over all their distributorships, the dealers, and that's who we're going to deal with. But Salvaraj stayed there to work, and it was kind of coincidence. When I went to Honda, Joe, Honda hired Salvaraj. I asked Salvaraj to go with me.
Yes.
He was with me there for several weeks at Honda. And Mako was so paranoid to have any of their secrets, I think, laid out to the Honda guys, or just to lose such a spectacular mechanic, a person like Sal.
Yeah.
They actually threatened him with deportation to mess with him.
Yes.
Because he was over here on his visa. So so Sal was back now at Mako. He left Honda, short stint, went back, and then I'm asking for a ride after the Honda debacle, spring of '74. And the Germans agreed. They said, I think they had another guy, it might have been Blackwell, and they were, helping him, support him probably with money, gas card, whatever. But they said, we'll give you a full sponsorship, but there's not going to be a whole lot of money involved and stuff. You're on your own. And I was doing motocross schools at the time that Denny Moore helped me set up the Mako distributor the year before. And we had a good network of schools, and I could make $1,000 or $2,000 easily doing some motocross schools when we had time to do it between the nationals. So anyway, so we did the first two nationals in California after I left Honda, and it was my friend Sonny Nutter that lent me his bike. And Sonny, fantastic person, good friend of mine. He was a Speedway national champion a couple times, and I got other stories with him and Speedway stuff, but I actually rode Sonny's personal bike, and I think that was the year that everybody was moving up suspension. So everyone had moved up suspension, and I rode that bike. It still had the stock suspension, so still the four inches of travel in the rear. But I think we finished in the top 10, maybe a little better at Bay Mare and Hangtown, and then headed back and hooked up with Salvaraj for the rest of '74.
Didn't you have Stackable there too at Mako at that time?
Stackable was doing really good. Let's see, CZ '73, I think.
Yeah, but I thought he was on Mako at that time.
'74. I think he was privateer on a CZ. I mean, on a Mako.
On a Mako, yeah.
I don't think he was getting full support like Blackwell. I think it was through a dealer or whatever, but he was finishing really good up there with us a lot of the times, or better. So I think his first year with Mako, when the Germans made a full push, was '75, and Steve Stackable, because he won Daytona. He won the opener in '75.
Yes.
So '74 was pretty much like it had been before, but it was with the Germans and Salvaraj. He helped me as much as he could, went to all the close races. So we did the nationals, Trans Am, all that stuff. I think at that time, We had some great races with Falta, DeCoster at the Interams. It may only been for 10 or 15 minutes, but they were great races to us because those guys had been world champions, and so yeah, we got through the Interam riding the 250s and the Nationals. I think I rode the 500s Nationals that year. Some years you could ride both classes, some years you couldn't. Some years they mixed the 125s in, and so 74 was pretty much that's how it went. I can't really remember much anything that was spectacular that happened in '74.
Well, then right after that, Gary, I don't know why your time at Mako ended again. There, you wound up on a CZ. Was that a privateer ride?
No, well, they called it at the time. We were building our Makos at Joe Zappa's in Atlanta, and he was helping Lackey with Ford mounted shock. He was building the shocks with reservoirs, and he had helped us earlier. But '74 was a big push on that suspension, going forward, improving the bikes. And Joe Zappa out of Atlanta, he was a welder, engineer, super guy, and he helped a lot of us. So I had talked with him about maybe riding CZ later. And if he could help us build a CZ, the CZ had offered me a deal. So when it ended with the Germans, I wasn't particularly happy with how it ended. Stackable was doing pretty good. They offered him a contract, and I pretty much read the writing on the wall. I wasn't going to get a contract. So I was looking, for other options. So CZ, they made the deal, and they supported, as I remember, they called it their team. CZ was Peter Lampu and Bobby Harris and myself. And that's how they advertised it. They even co-sponsored some races, I think, a Supercross and a National. But anyway, it pretty much, when I went to Long Island and picked up the CZs, it was pretty much, I got a couple of stock CZs. Bobby Harris did too. Bobby decided to do the same thing, and they helped him out. I think on my deal, they signed me a check over for like a couple $1,000, and they said, this will get you going, and blah, 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 and all the bikes and parts. And they went heavy on the parts because they knew we'd need the support later. So it was actually, understood under their breath that if you got to sell a few parts to make it to the next race, please do so, because we want you to get to all the races. So yeah, it was kind of funny. Those guys, Johnny Tusick was I think Johnny might have been one of Robert's mechanics back in the day, but he was running CZ, at least on the West Coast then. So yeah, so we went down, built a CZ with Joe Zappa, Ford mounted shocks. We tried everything. We tried air forks. We tried air in the forks and springs. We tried everything. Pretty much left the motor stock. Other than being heavy and not having real great forks, the bike was fairly good, especially the 400. So yeah, we came out of the gate doing good. We had some great finishes at the Florida Series, and we got second at Daytona. I think Tony D won a moto, and Stack maybe won a couple motos. I think Tony crashed out, so that's why he was out of the points. But I got second, and I think Cars Makers crashed out and broke. Semix, a couple of the top guys that would have definitely been in there, fighting us. But yeah, Stack won that at Mako, and they were super jazzed. And CZ was pretty happy that I got second.
Yeah. I bet they were. So, hey Gary, let's talk about this for a minute. I mean, with all this riding, all this racing, was fitness a big part of your program? Did you run? Did you bicycle? What did you do between all these races, or wasn't that really part of your schedule?
Well, except for Honda, when we would fly to the races, the big part of our schedule was driving to the races.
Oh,
so. That's kind of an excuse too, because we learned later how much training Gary Jones was doing and Brad Lackey, and those guys trained way much more than I did. I think Marty Tripes will tell you that, the training was out on, he would want to do it out on the motorcycle.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I tried to do. I tried to ride one day, if I could, at least during the week on one of my bikes or practice bikes, on the way driving to the next race. And yeah, there was some running involved in probably the last couple of years where I needed to run more because my talents, my age, I was getting older. My talents maybe were diminishing, and I had to go out and run with guys like Blackie, and they could run like 60 minutes pretty hard. And I'd go about 40 minutes and be pretty tired. So, there was a little bit of that training, but definitely not enough. I wasn't a big trainer.
Okay.
If I'd have been training all the way through my career, see, I didn't have my parents at my back. I was traveling either by myself or, I look back at that saying, yeah, I should have taken it more seriously. We could have probably done a lot better, because I led a lot of races and I got tired in a lot of them too, and got past maybe the last 5-10 minutes. So yeah, that's all training. You can't blame it all on the motorcycle and breaking down and all that stuff.
No,
that's as big a part of it as it can be.
How did your ride with DG come about, and them preparing a Suzuki for you?
Well, we were doing the Trans Am and finishing fairly well in the Nationals. I might have got a top 5 here and there. I think I finished 5th in the Supercross series on the CZ. I can't. Might have been Stackable the year he won, and maybe Semix was in there, and Weinert, I don't know, but Jim West. But I think I finished 5th in the Supercross series, and was doing okay at the 500 Nationals. The 250s broke all the time, so getting geared up for looking at 76, I really wasn't sure what I was going to do, because the money ran out real fast from CZ, and you could only sell so many parts, right? Because you needed the stuff to get to the next race.
Sure.
And they were pretty reliable bike. My 250s broke almost every race, so I had a lemon. I think it was discovered it had an air leak toward the end of the 250 races, but we had a short national class that year because of the 125s, I think. And so, so it broke almost every race. I can remember battling out with cars makers, and it was so funny. He had the RC Honda, and we went tooth and nail for most of this whole moto until the bike finally seized. And it was a friend, Mickey Kessler, had helped me. He said, "Here, let me port this cylinder a little bit," because he'd learned some stuff from Eric Crippa from Husqvarna, and so we got in and ground on the cylinder a little, and the thing ran like for the fastest it's ever ran. But it didn't finish the race. So the Trans Am was the time to show your stuff. If you want to get a ride, if you want to get some support. So I remember in Nebraska, I got a pretty good start, maybe in the top 6 or 7, and Tony D and I got stuck together for pretty much the whole race, and I hounded him pretty much the whole race, passed him a few times, he passed me back, but they had a whoop section that was kind of like stadium whoops, where you could really, get into 3rd gear, maybe 4th, and get through them, but you had to be pretty careful, and because it was pretty gnarly. So I can remember after that race, I can't remember if I beat Tony in the moto, but we were, like I say, neck and neck. But Keith McCarty came over, his mechanic, and said that a couple of the Japanese guys that were there wanted to talk with me. And we sat down, and Keith was kind of the interpreter. One of them spoke a little English, but they said, "Hey, we'd like you to ride the new RM. It's our new production bike. It's not out yet. We're working on it. It's coming out in 76. And we'll offer you a deal to ride that. The deal, we'll talk about it later, but it's going to be, at least bikes and parts, and maybe some mechanics help, and yeah, that was the deal." So I immediately said, "Well, this is tough riding the CZs. I think I can do pretty good, man. the works guys, the works bikes, I think Stackable was going to ride the bike.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to think. Oh, Billy Grossi. They said that's going to be our 250 guy and our 500 guy. And I said, pretty much, man, I'll do anything to, get one of those bikes and ride. They said, well, that's our budget. And that's what we can do, but we want to push the production bike. So that's how that evolved. When we got done with the Trans Am, I went down to Suzuki and they dumped a bunch of motorcycles and parts, and I headed off for the Florida Series. That was 76.
So that was you were riding a production bike from Suzuki. Did it had Fox shocks on it? And I saw some DG stickers on it too. Was DG helping you out there, or Fox? What was happening?
Well, in the beginning, I didn't get any help. It was basically a production deal. Suzuki kind of wanted it to be a production bike. So I rode the stock bike in the Florida Series. I think that's when Hannah came out on a big bike, and Hannah won the Florida Series. Stackable got second. I think I finished third, but I wouldn't count on it. But I was up there, but not as competitive as those two with their factory stuff. And then we went to the Supercross races, and I raced in what they call the 500 class. And most of the fast guys were in the 250, but they had a 500 Supercross. So they kind of changed it up the last couple of years, but that Suzuki wanted me to ride in that class. So my biggest competition was Rich Eierstadt. There's a couple other pretty fast guys. I can't remember all of them right now, but some of them had showed up to different races, not all of them. Brock Glover showed up at one. He was a youngster on an open bike at the Coliseum, and anyway, some other guys, some fast Northern California guys. But we got through the Supercross races. I think I won a bunch of the motos. I should have won Daytona, but the transmission blew up. The tranny blew again at Houston, but we got it back on the track after practice, and I finished there maybe second or third on the practice bike. And I think I finished second at Pontiac. And in Texas, we did real good. We won both nights. They had 2 nights of Supercross racing, and we won both nights. I think I won 3 motos and took a second in the last one just because I wanted to be safe and get the overall, not crash out. But yeah, Suzuki was really happy. So after that, we were getting ready to go to the Coliseum. In between there was a bunch of nationals, and I got hurt really bad at one of them. Broke all my ribs on one side at a 250 national. Got ran over on a start and missed 3 months. So yeah, that was the 250s through the summer. But to finish the Supercross series, we went to the Coliseum, and I flew out there because we were way back east. So we flew out there, and I remember Lackey met me, and a friend of ours gave us his El Camino, and we went down, and Suzuki said, go down to the Carlsbad School of Motocross, and they got your bike. I went down there, and it was Mark Blackwell's school bike. It was completely trashed. so that was the bike that I was supposed to beat Rich Eierstadt's RC 500 at the last Supercross race to win the championship, because we were like close, neck and neck. He'd had a few problems, I'd had a few problems. So I brought the bike back and showed it to Suzuki the day before the race at the Coliseum, and they started working on it feverishly. And yeah, I think I won a moto, got a couple good starts, and probably was in line maybe for a top 3 or maybe the win. I don't know. But the bike blew up. The throttle stuck off the peristyle jump. And I went off that peristyle and hit at the very bottom, and it turned hard 90. And I just slid off the back of the bike, and it hit the face of the corner berm and went straight up in the air as high as a telephone pole, screaming wide open. So, yeah, so after that, I told Suzuki, everybody that was at that race, in so many words, that I wasn't really too happy. And
they never like to get talking to like that. When you speak to your bosses, they're never wrong or anything they do. So I just like, if that's the best you can do, okay. So I didn't worry about what we were going to do after that. Lackey took me down to DG, introduced me to Gary Hangslaven, and said, "This should be your guy. You got these new RMs coming out. He's been winning all these races on a production bike against these guys. So you want to sell swing arms, you want to sell pipes, you want to sell carburetors. This is your guy."
That sounds just like Brad too. This is your guy.
Yeah. Oh, Brad's helped me out a couple of different times.
Yeah.
Through my career and after, and we've always been good friends. So yeah, so it's kind of funny. I'm sitting there, and Gary goes, "Well, here," pulls out a checkbook, and he starts writing, and he flips this check over to me, and it's like $2,000. And I'm like, I look at that, and I'm like, wow. Are you serious?
Yeah.
Because $2,000. I mean, that's probably more money than anybody's going to win at a Trans Am at the time. Okay.
Yeah.
For first place. So that's a pretty good chunk of change. And then he said, "Yeah, we'll help you with this and this and this." And yeah, we went on. We got Bob Fox. He wanted to try to push his Fox shocks, so he helped a bunch of us racers at the end of '76, and I was one of them. We had Fox shocks, aluminum swing arm, a DG pipe. Motor was pretty stock. Nobody touched the motor on my open bike. And but yeah, I owe a lot to Brad and to Gary of DG to helping me get through the rest of '76. Because it got to be a tough time toward the end. My dad had cancer, leukemia, and I didn't hear about it until the last few weeks coming back to race the last few races of California, because my mom didn't want to tell me. So that's how we finished out the year, and I was pretty down and just decided to retire.
Well, Gary, speaking of Brad Lackey, and you know what? I've heard the story from Brad. Now I want to hear it from you. Tell me what happened the time you guys hit black ice in a van. I think you were in two different cars though. There was a van.
Yeah.
There was black ice. Where did that happen? Was two different vans?
Well, Brad was just a spectator. I got to make that point clear first.
Okay.
He was asleep in his van back when you put a sleeper right behind the driver's seat, and he was asleep, and he had his tricked out van. His dad was a body shop guy, and they had it painted beautiful, stained glass CZ #1 on the back window. The guys that used to race, they remember the side pipes, and beautiful. And we'd left Oklahoma, and we were driving from Tulsa, Oklahoma. We were going to go to LA to get some help, because then we had to drive all the way to Puyallup, Washington, all within 1 week of racing in Oklahoma for the next Trans Am. And I was trying to catch Tim Hart. I had got second the week before at St. Louis, won a moto, and I won at Tulsa. First time I'd beaten everybody in the 250 class, and so we were super excited. And Brad, we're kind of going to drive together, but we got separated. We took off that night, I think, and then we raced all that day in Oklahoma, right?
Yeah.
But we drove as far as we could, got a hotel, and then got up in the morning. We got separated from Brad, and I'm in Mako's van, Eastern Mako's van, brand new van, but I'm towing one of their older vans, and they had given that to Steve Agronic, one of their local riders that was on the series.
Yeah.
He ran out of money, didn't have any money, wanted to keep going. I had the credit card. He talked me into, "I'll get a hitch, and you tow me to California. Nobody will know the difference." So I said, "Okay, I'll help you out." So we're going out of Flagstaff up toward, I think we were real close to the exit to go into the Grand Canyon. And it was real late at night, just dark, black. And I was going up this long hill, and all of a sudden I lost traction. And I could drive on the snow and ice. I mean, I was raised from Utah to Montana. I knew how to drive in that stuff. But, black ice, what are you going to do? the van I'm pulling starts to come around. I see it in my rearview mirror. and now it's passing me. And now I'm looking down the hill in the van that I'm driving. I'm completely went in a half a circle, and then I go off the road. Well, the van disconnected at the hitch, and it went rolling down the hill quite a ways, probably down to the other freeway going east, because we're on Highway 10 going to LA. And so we were still hanging on the edge, the headlights shining. I opened the driver's door, which I had to push it real hard because it was on its side to try to get out. And I'm crawling out, and I see this van go by, but it's dark, but it's spinning in a 360. So this guy, evidently, he couldn't drive on black ice either. But he hits this bank because the road kept going, but it was a big V cut in the mountain. So they make a bank like 6 feet high next to the pavement, and then there's kind of a road up on that, and then it goes on up in the huge, wedge in the mountain. So this van hit this, and it flipped and landed up on its tires. It did a complete 360 and landed. And we kind of saw what was going on, but you could really see it once we got out and we walked up there. He completely flipped upside down. And we see it's Brad's van. And before we went over there, just as we're crawling out after the crash, we hear this blood-curdling scream. And we heard this windshield hit. We didn't know what happened, but glass hit the pavement. So the windshield popped out when the van came to a sudden stop. It popped out, it broke, made the glass noise, and then we hear the blood-curdling scream. So we didn't know what we're going to see. So we go over there, and we see Brad's friend. Can't remember his name, but he's just like in shock looking at us. And he's looking down at us because he's up 6 foot on this bank. And then we hear this, God damn son of a, we hear this, you wrecked my van. And it was Brad.
Yeah.
So everybody was okay. Nobody was hurt. The poor Denny Moore, his 2 vans are upside down. One of them's all the way down totaled with Steve's bike in it. Steve's toolbox, I think, was in it. I don't know about his bike. Can't remember. My bike was okay. I think it bent the back frame on the fender. But anyway, we're sitting there talking about this, going, can't believe we're all alive. And Brad's really pissed about the van, and I'm like, what am I going to say to Mako? And this car comes by, and he's flying. We can hear it. It just sounds like a race car. So, okay, well, we got to get on the inside of this turn where we all just drove off, because this guy's going to go flying off into the Grand Canyon, right? So we stand on the inside of the corner, and this guy comes around the corner, and he has to be doing at least 60 or 70 on this ice.
Oh, no. This is Joe Abadi. You're listening to Vintage Motocross Radio. We're going to be right back with Gary Chaplin in just a minute. He was telling a great story about going up the road, actually. Him, Brad Lackey, Steve Agronik, somewhere in Arizona, on their way back to LA after doing some racing.
To an automatic voice message system.
Chaplin, what's up?
95180.
We'll get right back with Gary in just a minute. Listen, if you're watching and obviously listening on Facebook, if you want to make some comments, please do so. I can see your comments here through StreamYard. And I'll be happy to maybe ask Gary some of your questions if I can see them on the screen. I'm going to try now to get back in touch with Gary Chaplin. And he can finish up his story.
Hello, Joe.
All right. So you, Agronik, and Lackey are standing in the corner. A guy's barrel assing down his road. You think for sure he's going into the Grand Canyon. What happened?
Yeah. Sorry about that. Maybe my phone's getting tired.
No, it's okay.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Okay. Yeah, so the guy coming around the corner, he takes off out of barrel out, just bent some held up some leather, and we see the brake lights, and then he backs up, and it's none other than Dan Gurney at the wheel. So he was at the race watching the Montesses, I guess, because he was the owner, I think, at the time. Him and another gentleman. So yeah, so Dan Gurney could go around that corner, but we didn't know what the hell we were doing in the van. So anyway, yeah, we had to pack Brad's van up in a big moving trailer or truck, U-Haul, and we flew back. I think Steve drove one of the vans back to LA, and I told Mako the story. I said the good news is I won last a couple, yesterday or whatever at Tulsa, and then I told him the bad news. But Denny Moore from Eastern Mako, he was a good sport, and he goes, "Don't worry about it. Get to the next race in Washington." That's what he said.
Gary, you do a lot of vintage racing since since vintage racing has become so popular again over the years. And Bubba Dennis, a listener, I got a couple of questions here from some of the listeners, and I thought this one was very interesting. It says the vintage bikes we ride today with the technology and the suspension, with so many talented machinists out there, do you think that today's vintage bikes are on par with maybe the factory bikes you were riding back in the mid-'70s?
Yeah, I really do. A lot of the newer technology, some of these guys are putting into the suspension, the forks and the shock, where maybe you don't see it as much, but they're using a lot newer cartridge fork or something in the older style. And then the engine work for sure. I can only speak from my experience, but Ron Radigan, he was the one that got me back into racing, going to Scott Burnsworth's race. Scott invited me. I don't know, that was probably 6-7 years ago, and I raced Ron's Mako, and it was fairly stock. It was a 250, 77, 78. And I raced that bike, and then I raced a 400, also the same bike with a 400 displacement. And Eric Cook from Mako Only, he did a lot of work on it toward the end. And he put some newer forks on it, Mako, but several years newer and much stronger, bigger diameter. Yeah, and the bike definitely works better. Now, my experience was the older Makos, so my first one was a 71. They were real similar to probably a 70 and maybe a 69, but that was my experience. And then a 73 Mako and a 74,
right,
which had the moved up shocks. So I rode at Diamond Don's race a year ago. I rode Bubba Dennis's 69 250 Mako, and it by far was the fastest 250 Mako I'd ever ridden. It had the smoothest power, the most torque, and quick revving. It was a fantastic bike. Handled, like a 69, 70, 71 Mako, but still handled probably better than what we were riding back then, because it had newer type shocks on it, and he probably had done some fork work. And then just a beautiful show bike to boot. Tim Barty was a friend of his, and he got me the invite to meet Bubba Dennis, and he's a fantastic person. And I guess he doesn't let many people ride his bikes, but he let me ride, and it was really great.
Yeah, well, that was a really good question. You know what, Gary? Speaking of engine building, I wanted to ask you about a company that you had called RPM. It was in Ohio. What was RPM, and when was that going on in your career? While you were racing or afterward?
No, that was after I retired. Like I said earlier, my father passed away.
Yeah.
And I had an offer from a Mako, a Suzuki dealer back in Toledo, Ohio, to come back and go into business with them. And he was also a distributor in warehouse car parts, hard parts. And racing cars, drag strips was big back then, and he was a pretty big player in the country at the time. and his kids raced, and we had met them on some radio or TV stuff that we did when there was a national, like at Delta, Ohio. And so, you know, I took him up on the offer, pretty much put all my money, sold my motorhome, which was paid for, put all my money I had into the company with him at his place of business, and it took off really well. He has some experience in building XR75s and porting two-strokes, and I learned a little bit while I was out on the racing circuit all those years from some guys like Eric Crippa, Mickey Kessler, that has helped me. So I was in the middle of this performance machine shop, and basically I was the guy on the phone, and we hired people as we needed them to do the machine work. But we got into building race engines and became quite successful. Kind of before Pro Circuit really was going. At the end of our time, I think they were getting going, but it was with Husqvarna's. DG had already taken a left turn and kind of gotten out of most of the motocross stuff. So yeah, this was in '77, and we made a go of it till around '84. We built some engines for some great people. Brad Lackey sent me some of his European motors one year from his Kawasaki's. They were having trouble getting all the power they thought they could. Mm-hmm. So we were into balancing crankshafts, and in doing so, we would maybe weight the crankshaft or lighten the crankshaft, being what the power band needed, and doing some pretty nice tricks in the porting world, and getting a blueprint design on an engine. So we did several engines for Brad, sent them back over to Europe to try to keep his last year going with Kawasaki. And we built some stuff for Hank Scott, flat track racing also. Hank was successful with a 250 Yamaha bike that we built as a short tracker. He was known for his winning so many of the mile flat track nationals, but an all-around great competitor. And he won several short tracks. I think a couple at Daytona. I can't remember, maybe Houston, but built a fantastic bike for him. And our work was, like I say, the porting and the balancing of the crank and building the engine. He got a Bill's pipe made for it and put an electron carburetor on it. And Frank figured out the tuning, and that short tracker was fantastic power. Even Kenny Roberts, I remember, Kel Brothers, they couldn't believe how fast Hank could go on that motorcycle. So yeah, we built a lot of stuff. Unfortunately, we got into a time in 1981 when the economy, went the bottom fell out. Yeah. So we had a tough time. We were working on three-wheelers. We were working on snowmobiles, anything to stay alive. And I'll just cut to the chase and end it. Partnerships can be good, but that one didn't end up being good. And I had to bow out of that company and get all my releases signed because there were some underhanded things going, and also a partner that was convicted of embezzlement, fraud, and that's what took the company down. So it was unfortunate, but I try to see the positives in everything, and I ended up moving to California and going to work in construction, having a great career, and everything aligned as it did, and took me to a wonderful life that I have right now.
A couple of weeks ago, Gary, we were talking, and you were on your way out to ride a KTM that you told me was one of the best bikes ever that you've ever owned. What is it about this KTM? You tell me that they're giving you some amazing technical support. What KTM is it? What model is it? And where are you riding that bike these days?
Yeah, well, I've ridden modern bikes, but mostly when my son Craig was racing. Mm-hmm. He had a 250 Honda, and I had a 450. I tried to help him, teach him, and tutor him a little. His mom kind of wanted him didn't want it to get him into motocross, but she finally gave in, and he was always a stick and ball sports kid, super talented with whatever he did. So yeah, we got some Hondas, and I got a 450. He raced 250s, I believe, in 06, 07, maybe 08. But he went through the beginner novice ranks, and I had that 450, which he eventually took over and was racing also as a novice amateur rider. And then doing good enough, he could have went intermediate, but Mom said go to college. So that kind of ended it for him. But I started racing that Honda along with vintage bikes when I met Ron Radigan. So I would race in the modern class, and it was a super lot of fun. I'd race the old Mako, and then I'd race the Honda. So I broke my shoulder, my humerus, pretty bad, and it took me about a year to recover. Back around 2014. So I've been racing for 3 years or so. And so I took a year or two off. I've only raced a few times since, but I've been riding a lot. So I ride dual sport, and I decided to buy a KTM. And I bought a factory edition. It's a couple years old, but it's really close, similar to even the 2021 bike out now. So a lot of fun. It's a handful. I called my friend Salvarage. We stayed close for the past some years, and I told him to try to quiz DeCoster a little bit. I need to get some suspension work done, and they helped me out. Sal said take it to, I don't know if I should plug anybody on this, but
sure, if you want.
AEO, I took it to them. Mark Johnson worked for WP, and yeah, they did a fantastic job. So I'm trying to learn how to ride a modern bike smooth and controllable, and I super enjoy going to Grant Langston's shop, Langston Motorsports. His mom and dad are fantastic. So I buy most of my parts, everything from them. And yeah, so we're just having fun on the modern bikes. I don't go very fast anymore. I try to keep it that way. But yeah, made so many friends and ride with so many different kinds of guys that starting the Cal VMX races,
Yeah. Well,
it's crazy. There's a lot of people that still ride that I used to race with. And, I mean, when I started, Jim Wilson, Tom Rapp, I could go on, Billy Urban, Wyman Pretty, Bob Grossi, Doug Grant, Norgard, Marty Trice. Those guys were the guys that I started with. And then I ended my career, racing with my teammate, Bobby Harris, and Rich Erstad, Billy Grossi, and then, of course, Dwayne Jones, Gary Jones, Tommy Croft, Marty Smith, Bob Hanna. I mean, there's just so many guys. And probably the biggest one, Brad Lackey, that I've always thought was probably the most talented. And as far as taking this talent to the next level, winning the world championship, is something that, it's hard to match. I haven't seen many guys match his statistics. So knowing all these guys and being friends with a lot of these guys, some of them have passed away and have left us. But my new friends that I've met just in the last few years that I raced with is incredible. And that we spend a lot of time together. Tommy Croft, Billy Urban, Brad Lackey, Marty Smith was one that the last few years that my wife and I got to know, him and Nancy, and we were going to spend more time together with him and the Urbans, and and just the way things play out.
Yep.
That's not going to happen with Marty and Nancy. So you got to take advantage of your time here and all your friends, and of course Facebook. Facebook has put a lot of these people back into your lives. Warren Reed isn't a guy that I raced with a lot, but his dad was one of my mechanics at Honda. So I followed Reed's career after I retired, and it's been fun to follow so many riders that I heard of in the beginning their careers after I retired. So yeah, so now it's just I can't say it's all retirement. My wife Anita and I live in Canyon Lake, and she's a school teacher and really successful. I started a company. I was helping a friend with the 91 freeway, and I worked in his company to help him move his company to another location. And after helping him with that, I started my own consulting company in construction, which is what I, retired motorcycles. I got into the ironworkers trade and was in it for almost 30 years and retired, building high-rise buildings and commercial stuff.
And here we are.
It's anyway. My point is, we've had a good life, met a lot of good people, and I've got a couple of daughters, a stepdaughter, Deanna, that lives in NorCal, and my daughter lives in Jacksonville, Wyoming, Brandy, and Craig and Preston, they live with us here in the same area in Canyon Hills. We live in Canyon Lake. Vintage racing has been a big part of it, especially in the last 11 years. Meeting all these people that we used to know and new friends. It's just a blessing. It's something I'll cherish.
Well, Gary, I can't thank you enough for being here with me this morning, sharing your stories about your time on the circuit, from your humble beginnings all the way up to all the things that you've accomplished, and most of all, the wonderful family you have and the great friends. You got a lot of fans out there. A lot of people had said they were going to be listening today. A lot of them did, and I just wanted to thank you for being my guest this morning.
Hey, thank you so much, Joe. Knowing you the past few years, through Brad and Lori, has also been a blessing. You and Susie are fantastic people, and it's been joyful to help you in a few projects also, and then be around to party with you at reunions and such. And it's really nice to see you doing the VMX radio with all your fantastic. You have some fantastic guests. I hope I didn't bore too many people.
No, I don't think so, Gary.
With this whole interview, but I appreciate it, and we love you.
Thank you so much. My regards to Anita and Susie, and I hope to see you guys very soon.
Okay, thanks, Joe.
Thank you.
Thanks for everyone listening.
You're welcome. Gary Chaplin, what a great guest he was this morning. I want to thank you all for joining me today for my chat with Gary Chaplin. As always, I have to thank my sponsors, Nightmare Racing, the best reproduction Kawasaki plastic on the planet. Paul Stainerd, thank you so much. You and Preston Petty Products, the legend continues. Russell Waters, AMSOIL, the first in synthetic oil since 1973. I want to wish my friend Russell Waters good wishes, actually, well wishes. He broke his foot or his heel out there the other day, and I hope things get better for you real soon, Russell. Full Circle Racing, Tom McAllister, thank you so much for being a sponsor of Vintage Motocross Q&A and Vintage Motocross Radio. For all your rim, spokes, lacing, and truing needs, whether it's vintage or modern, please get in touch with Tom McAllister from Full Circle Racing. Vinco, keep the ride going with over 650 products in their catalog. Motion Pro for specialized tools, cables, and controls. Golden Industries. Go to goldenindustries.com. Check out some of the things they make for fuel systems. They've got a great fuel filter specifically designed for off-road bikes or dual-purpose bikes, and they've got one for street bikes too. Golden Industries. Check them out online. Be sure to visit all of our sponsors on Facebook or online. Thank you, Scott Hybrink, for all the wonderful pictures that you supplied for me today for Gary's slideshow. And don't forget, in 2 weeks, November 22nd, my guest will be Mr. Tommy Croft. I'm looking forward to speaking with Tommy. Join us on Wednesday, the Vintage Motocross Q&A. We'll be there Wednesday at 6. We'll tell you more about who my guest may be for this coming Sunday. But until then, this is Joe Abadi. Thank you for listening to Vintage Motocross Radio. Enjoy the rest of your day, and join me again on Wednesday for Vintage Motocross Q&A. Bye for now.